Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar titled 5 Building Blocks for a Sustainable Content Strategy. I'm Kim Zimmerman, Senior Managing Editor of Demand Gen Report. I'll be your moderator for this presentation. Today's webinar will cover some tips for developing a content strategy to take you into 2016 and beyond. This session is part of our week-long strategy and planning series, which will cover the emerging challenges and opportunities modern marketers face and offer practical solutions to supercharge your 2016 plans. Be sure to check out the rest of the webinar series, either in real time or on demand. We want to encourage everyone to follow along and share your thoughts and feedback during today's webinar on social media using the hashtag SBS2015. You'll also see some other relevant Twitter handles up there. Reach out to us. We'll be giving away a coveted Apple Watch at the end of the series. You'll earn 1 entry point when you register and a second for each section that you attend live. So good luck with that. For those of you who may be new to Demand Gen Report, here's a quick overview. We're an all-digital media company, publishing daily news, a weekly email newsletter, special reports and original research, and a rich menu of additional resources. In addition, we produce the annual Content to Conversion Conference. If you haven't done so already, please join the 30,000 plus subscribers to our weekly newsletter. You can visit our recently updated website at www.demandgenreport.com. For today's presentation, we're using the On24 platform. During the presentation, you can access all the information you need from the platform's toolbar. We encourage you to ask our presenter questions. To do so, simply click the Q&A widget at the top right corner of your screen. Today's session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive an archive link to the presentation to go back and review and share with your colleagues. Before I introduce our featured speakers today, one last housekeeping note. Today's presentation is slated to run about 30 minutes with 10 minutes for Q&A following the presentation. Please be sure to submit your questions during the Q&A portion using the widget. And now I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. As Vice President of Content Strategy for Content for Demand, Dana Harder is a passionate content strategist and results-driven marketer. She's also a coffee addict, shoe hoarder, and yoga devotee who sports purple or pink hair depending on the day of the week. Matt Mckenzie is Chief Content Officer for Content for Demand, where he guides the development and delivery of cutting-edge, buyer-focused content strategy solutions. Prior to joining C4D, he held leadership roles as a content director, editor, and analyst for companies such as United Business Media, Dun & Bradstreet, CNET, and Ziff Davis. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to you, Dana.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you so much for everyone's time today. I know everyone is busy these days, and when we look at a week-long webinars, we're really excited that you could be here with us today and take time to join the webinar. Matt and I hopefully will give you guys some really good foundational and steps that you can take back with you on building blocks for a sustainable content strategy. It's good timing as we all go into 2016. Before I jump in, I just want to take a look at state of content marketing. I don't think any of this is new or stuff that we haven't seen yet before, but I do think it's good to set the stage. So we know that everybody, or 90% at least, of B2B marketers are now using content marketing. If we looked at that a couple of years ago, that wasn't the case, but it is now. So what does that mean? It means that there's a lot more content out there. And when we look at people's plans going into 2016, 55% plan to increase their content marketing investments. So that means that everybody who's already producing content is going to continue to produce more content. So while we all think content is great and we know that it drives results, it drives leads, it drives conversions, it drives more revenue in our pockets, in order to do that, it has to be done right. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of content fatigue. We're seeing a lot of content out there that's not being used at all, not being used in the right way, or not being downloaded and read. And the reasons are there's a lot of reasons why this is, but I think primarily we look at is that we're still struggling with what content should look like. A lot of content that's being put out there is not talking to the buyer. It is based on our products. It's based on our solutions. It's not thought leadership. It's not about the challenges or pain points that are keeping your prospects up at night. So it's not speaking to them. And the one thing that we know is that if content doesn't speak specifically to your buyer, it's never going to get seen. So what does that mean? What we're doing is not sustainable. We can't keep doing what we're doing. You can't keep producing more and more content and not get the response. Nobody has that kind of money. Nobody has that kind of time. So what we're going to look at today are ways in which we can create a strategy that's actually going to produce results. There's a process for creating content that does this. It includes personas, content audits, gap analysis, messaging, creating the content. Repurposing is playing a huge part these days in how we create content, and of course then how we're going to measure it. When all of these things come together, we've got the perfect marriage for a content strategy that at the end drives measurable results. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Matt Mckenzie here to kind of dive into some of these building blocks.
Great, thanks, Dana. So some of those stats that Dana showed you are pretty sobering, especially if, like most marketing teams, you've got a fairly tight budget, and even if it's growing, you're being asked to show results, and you need to get those results pretty quickly. So I'm going to walk you through a few steps that are pages out of our own playbook, from our own consulting methodology. And I want you to keep in mind the theme of the presentation today, which is sustainability. The approach that we take is it's designed to be consistent, to be repeatable. You can do this again and again, and you'll get the same results, the same outputs. It's proven and it's tested. We've done it with lots of clients, and we've gotten great results. And above all, keep in mind that this is designed to create value for your organization. You're going to get more out of it than you put into it if you follow this consistently and really apply this to your own B2B content marketing strategy. So the first thing that I'll walk you through is really the foundation for everything else that we do, which are the personas. It's really the question of getting to know your buyer, but you need a process to do that. You can't just do it based on gut instinct or guesswork or what the sales guy down the hall is telling you. You need a much richer and more complete picture, and so that's what this process is designed to do. And that in turn will get you the insights that you need to really build the rest of the process, and that will end with content that's going to get the kinds of results that you need. Here's just a quick overview of the process that we're going to be describing. And these are a little out of order the way I'm going to describe them. I'm going to do messaging last, but that's for the sake of clarity as we go through, so just keep that in mind. We'll do audit and gap analysis first, and then we'll go back and we'll do the messaging and explain that for you. So the persona development process, it doesn't have to be complex, although certainly the more mature organizations are using a richer and somewhat more complex approach. But above all, it needs to be a repeatable and reliable formula so that you know the steps you're taking, you know the assumptions that are going into it, and you know the outputs that you're going to be getting that you can apply later in the process. And for us, this does start with the insights you're going to get from inside your own organization. That can't be really the only source of information you're going to get if you want to have the best results. But it is a good starting point because you do have good insights in there, especially from folks like your salespeople, sometimes your sales executives, perhaps your product people or your customer service people. So we get insights from those folks. You'll also get good insights from your data sources, from your marketing automation platform, from your CRM system. Those are great sources of data, especially early on in the process when you're trying to segment your audience and get sort of those what we call proto-personas, which are the starting point that you're going to begin building around to fill those out. But once you've got those insights, you want to take the next step if you possibly can. And this is what the best-in-class organizations are doing and what we work with them to do. And that involves quantitative research. So that's either surveys or focus groups where you're recruiting people who are going to fit in kind of the broad firmographic traits. So, the same industry vertical, the same basic job role, the same company size. You're going to want to design a survey that really asks them the kinds of questions that are going to get at the truth about who they are, what makes them tick. So things like pain points, their business initiatives, their buying triggers, their watering holes, where do they go for information. All of those kinds of things fit into the process. And you're going to, it's a long and involved process for us. We take great pains to make sure that we're getting the right audience for surveys that we want to get. But you can make it a lot more informal if you need to, depending on the resources that you have. So the point is that you want to be able to make this a quantitative process. You want to bring data into it, have some way of organizing it in terms of numbers that you can analyze. And you also want to bring testing and validation into the process. Validation is really just a fancy way of saying you want to look at the assumptions behind the assumptions. So for example, when you talk to the folks in your sales or marketing organization about your customers, what kinds of assumptions are they bringing? What experiences do they have that are shaping their view of the customer? And are there questions there that perhaps should be challenged and tested as part of the survey process? I think everybody has those assumptions, those prejudices that they bring to this process. And if you can uncover those and test them, sometimes you get really good insights, or you can overturn assumptions that people have been holding for a long time in your organization, and you can get past those. You also want to bring in customer conversations. So, talk to your customers, of course. It's almost assumed, but don't take it for granted. It's a very important part of the process, and you want to have a structured format for this conversation. Ask the same questions to these people. Look for patterns, similarities, conflicts, things that you can test, or things that you can bring into the next stage of the process. Now, what you've got there is a lot of information, a ton of information. And you're going to want to begin organizing this. And like I said, that process should begin with the questions you're asking previously. And I think we actually have a worksheet or a workbook that we're going to make available to everybody that will help you organize the kinds of questions you want to ask as part of your persona research process. So don't worry too much about exactly what those questions should be. We'll have some resources that will help you out with that if you want those. These are just some examples of the questions you should be asking. So things like buying triggers. Why do your buyers take the action that they take at that particular moment in time? Pain points. What keeps them awake at night? What worries them during the day? What makes them concerned about whether they're doing a good job, whether they can even keep their job, whether the market is changing from beneath their feet? And of course, the content preferences. Where are their digital watering holes? Where do they go for information? Where do they go to talk to their peers and to find out what their peers and competitors are doing? That's always a very important part of the process. There are other questions that you can ask, and again, like I said, we'll have some worksheets that you can take back with you to help you think about those. So here's an example of our output from this process. This is the first slide of our sort of core persona template, and this is part of what we present to our clients once we're finished with our research. And again, here, the print is a little bit small, but I think you can kind of get the gist of it, how we've organized this in terms of those major buckets, the pain points, the watering holes, the triggers, their business priorities, how do they measure success, all of that. And it's organized in terms of simple bullet points. You want to be able to take a lot of data and begin making decisions here about what's important, and distill it down into bullet points that you can take these in turn and apply these to the subsequent steps of the process that we're going to be walking you through. So that was really a whirlwind tour of how to build personas. by necessity, we have to move pretty quickly through all of this. I know there's a lot going on here, but hopefully that gives you a starting point for your own work. What I want to show you next is I want to move over to a different part of this process right now, which is your content library. When we work with clients, one of the biggest pain points they have is the state of their content library. Typically, they have a fair amount of content. Sometimes they have a lot of content. And almost always, they don't really understand what they have, how it applies to their buyers in general, or especially how it applies to the personas that they're building as part of this process. And they also may not understand even basic facets of their library, like what's the quality like in there? Do you have stuff that can be repurposed effectively? How old is your content? How vulnerable is your content to aging? These are fundamental questions, and they seem obvious, but it's surprising sometimes how few organizations have the time or resources to dive into their content library and begin answering these very important questions. So the content audit is obviously meant to help you solve that problem. And why audit? That sounds obvious. I still think it's useful to dig into the reasons why you really want to conduct a content audit like this. Where do you focus your new content investments? You don't want to keep creating the same content that serves the same buyers, same point of your buyer's journey. That's wasteful, and ultimately could backfire on you when you go to create campaigns and you don't have what you need. You want to know what you have in terms of being able to repurpose content, what you need to update or even retire, which assets have quality usability issues, which buyers or stages of the buyer's journey are you currently addressing or have you not yet addressed, and what content is available for turnkey campaign use. You can be surprised sometimes how hard it is to go in and simply pull stuff out that you need for a campaign because you have a good way of organizing what you have. So all of these things are excellent reasons to go through the audit process. As far as what and how to audit, it can be as simple as a spreadsheet with a few basic criteria. Our process is obviously much more involved because we're doing this for large clients with relatively complex needs. Here's a basic list of things that you can keep in mind as you create your own audit plan. Things like format, date of publication, persona alignment if you have existing personas. If not, then simply perhaps alignment by basic job role or industry category or things like that. Buyer's journey alignment. You can usually create a basic structure for understanding what you have in terms of early stage educational content versus perhaps late stage justification or business case building content. There are some other criteria here that you can take a look at later, but which ones of these are important to you depends upon what you're finding in your own content library. You should begin this process, but I would recommend doing as many of these as you can so that you get a good start on getting your content library into order. It's a very labor-intensive process, and I understand it can be a painful process, but it's a necessary one, and the more legwork you put in up front, the easier this will be to keep your library maintained as you continue to create new content and to build out your campaigns and move up the maturity curve with your programs. So the gap analysis is kind of the flip side of the content audit. It's a matter of once you know what you've got, then you can begin to plug that into your plans for creating a campaign. And so the process is really pretty straightforward. As I'll show you in a second, you're going to start with a message map or a series of messaging points that you can use to plug into different stages of a buyer's journey, whether that's 3 stages or 6 stages like the one that we follow because we follow the serious decisions methodologies as a rule, or you can have your own buyer's journey, your own model for that. The point is that you want to be able to organize a campaign as a matrix like that, and then begin asking questions of your content library. What do I have that will address a key messaging point within my current content library at a distinct phase of the buyer's journey? And what do I not have? What do I need to create by repurposing my content library? What do I perhaps need to have by creating new content? And of course, at this point, you're going to know what new content you need, and you're going to be able to make more informed decisions about the content creation process. And this is an example of our own deliverables. So we also create that heat map that you see on the right. So it's kind of an at-a-glance view of whether the client has content available for this process, or if they need to repurpose or create new content. So let's go back now to the messaging that I've been talking about that you plug into that gap analysis. This is really kind of the in-between phase between your persona, the insights in your persona, and your process of actually creating content. And it's a question of taking the insights from your persona and distilling those and making them applicable to your current campaign. Which solutions are you marketing? Which personas are your priorities to speak to? And what messages can you create and disseminate to them that are going to be engaging to them and relevant to get their attention, stand out from the noise of the marketplace, and really begin to have a conversation with them. And again, we follow the Serious Decisions model for how we organize the messaging points that we create across 6 stages of a typical buyer's journey, which lets us spin those messages a little bit for the various phases of the buyer's journey, so that they're always targeted and relevant, and they work in a progression, so that each messaging point sets the stage for the next in the conversation. This is a little bit of an eye chart. So when you have the slide deck after the presentation, you can go back and look at these. What you see up top are examples of the messaging points that we create by looking at our personas, pulling together some common threads, and looking at them in terms of what our priorities are for building campaigns. And then we get these statements or assertions, and we usually put them in first person. We like to walk in the buyer's shoes, as we say, and that helps us do that. And then you spin those messaging points across each stage of the buyer's journey to make them a little more targeted, like I said.
So we believe that once you've laid the foundational blocks that Matt just went through, there's really 4 key ways that we're going to create the killer content and killer campaign that you need to going forward. The first one is to make sure that we're creating content and progression and align it to the buyer's journey. This is really important, as we know that, the content needs to pull people through that journey, and if all of your content is focused at top of the funnel or middle, the experience won't be the same. You're not going to convert the clients that you need to through the funnel, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. The second way is to let the persona define the asset type, and we'll dive into what that looks like and how we create content and decide the asset type. Make sure that you're creating content for the entire funnel. So for us, that means that when you're creating an asset, take a step back and see where else you can use it in your process. And again, we'll dive a little deeper into that. And then last, we want to make sure that we're repurposing and modularizing content. Content is expensive. We know that. We want to make sure that you can leverage that investment much farther into the year than just what you intended to use it for. So if we look at the first step, creative progression, we want to make sure that you define your buyer's cycle. We use the Serious Decisions framework. This actually comes from their Serious Decision Nautilus, but it tends to align pretty good with most people's buyer's journey, right? There's an education phase, a solution, or vendor selection. Everybody may have slightly different names for that. But the important part is, and again, this is small as well, when you get this slide, dig into this and take a look. What am I supposed to do in the education phase? I'm supposed to loosen the status quo, and I'm supposed to get that prospect to commit to change. How do I do that? I do that by informing them about a business issue and making them believe that they have that problem. And then I do that by triggering them and helping them pinpoint that concept that's going to persuade them to take action. So you'll lay this out in your messaging, and then when I create my content, it's important to have content that aligns with the different messaging within these stages. This, at the end of the day, is what's going to help you create killer content. So letting the persona define the asset type, this is an interesting question for us. Matt and I hear this all the time. How do I know which type of content should I use where in the funnel? And there's definitely rules of thumb as you go. I mean, we tend to see infographics and videos used in the top of the funnel, maybe ebooks. We tend to see case studies and testimonials more late stage in the funnel. But what I will tell you is that there's much more that goes into that decision than just what somebody might tell you is good for the top of the funnel. one of the areas is making sure we know our personas. If you've done your persona work, you should ask, what type of content do you consume? Where do you consume your content? These are really important because it's going to help define what type of content I should be using. You may think interactive content is really cool, but what you might have found in your persona research is that CIOs don't actually use interactive content very much. So you probably don't want to create a whole bunch of interactive content. So, make sure that you use what you learned in your personas to help define what that asset type is, and then also test. Infographics don't always need to be used in the top of the funnel. It's more about the messaging. If you have a message that is meant for, the later down the funnel aligned to your buyer's journey, you can, an infographic is the best way to tell that story. There's nothing saying you can't use an infographic in the solution and selection phase of the journey. So keep that in mind when you're deciding the content. It's more about knowing your buyer and then understanding the messaging and what type of content is best going to tell that story for that message versus what is best just based on an assumption what you're hearing out there. So the third step is content for the entire funnel. And this doesn't mean that you should be creating content for the entire funnel. I mean, you should be, but it's more a step back when I'm going to create a new asset. So, for example, I'm showing a marketing health check in the corner that you can see. We know that when we designed this asset with a client, they actually had 3 ways this was going to be used. It was going to be used in a campaign at the top of the funnel. It was going to be used as a sales enablement tool, and it was also going to be used for current customers. So when they designed this one asset, they created 3 different things. That's a great way to leverage your investment on content when you're creating net new content, is think about how else is it going to be used. And even if somebody else doesn't handle sales enablement content, it's not you, start communicating with the other areas of the business who are creating content. And when you're doing one asset, talk to them. Find out if there's a way they could use it too. Pull your resources together, break down the silos, and you're going to create a much better piece of content that's going to be able to be used time and time again. The fourth key to this is repurposing and modular content. This is really key these days, especially when we look at repurposing. As more of us have been creating content, which we have, we're starting to see that many of you and our clients have robust content libraries. And so, when we go to do a campaign, the first, instinct is to go, okay, I need 4 new assets for this campaign. And, if you've done your foundational work, like Matt said earlier on, and you've done a content audit, you're going to see that when I go into that campaign, if I've mapped it to the persona and I've mapped it to the journey, I can sort my audit and go, oh, look, I have 4 assets already that meet my persona and that, will align to the campaign I'm trying to run. You may also see that you have 1 gap. So I've got 2 that I can use, and I have 1 that I have to create, and then I've got 1 that it's not quite a fit, but it looks like I can repurpose it. So the goal of repurposing, and the way that we talk about it, is that I can take an existing asset and I can break it into something smaller with not having to do additional research or additional interviews. So the goal is that that other asset lives within this. So a good example is kind of the middle column. I have a white paper, and when I broke it apart, when I looked into it, I had enough stats in that white paper that supported an infographic. They're still current, so I don't have to find new stats. There's enough in there that I can break out into a G-book, which for us is a little more of a visual ebook type format, so I can break up the white paper with some sections, a stat, make it really visual. And there's enough in there that I can build a script to create a video. So the goal there is I was able to take that and create 3 new assets without a lot of upfront work. So that's what we call repurposing. Now, modular content is slightly different for us. That's where I take an idea and I'm pulling it through multiple assets. So again, it's still less work than creating 3 completely new assets on totally different topics, because I'm going to create a foundational piece. So if I look at the first piece, which is progressive, that guide is probably my foundational piece. I created a guide, and now I'm going to pull through. I'm going to see what other assets I can back up into it. I can create a blog, and I can create a webinar. And they're all going to be slightly different. All of this information may not have lived within that guide, but it was able to give me other assets to create and minimize the amount of work I had to create it. And then, we also look at modular in a many-to-one way. This is about how can I round up things together? I have a whole bunch of blogs in my blog. Can I do a roundup and create one ebook or one different asset that's got multiple blogs in it? So again, not a lot of work, and I took existing content that I have. Are there, multiple assets that I have that when combined, I can pull out pieces of them to make a checklist? And case study portfolio, great way to take all of those case studies that you have and round them up into one asset. So the goal when we look at repurposing as modular is utilizing what you have to create more assets. So you're not always starting from scratch. And this is going to make life much easier for you when you're creating content, because creating new content starts with a new idea, and then I have to make sure that it's actually doable. It's a much harder and longer drawn-out process. So this, taking the strategy and approach, whether it's repurposing or modularizing content, is going to help you create more content faster and on a much tighter schedule. So our last piece of the puzzle today is about measurement. And the thing I always like to say with this is, when we start talking to clients about measurement, it's always kind of this pie in the sky that, oh my gosh, if I were doing this, my measurement would look like this, and I'd have all of this data, and I'd be analyzing it all the time. The problem with that is it's daunting, and it takes time to get to that level of data that this wish list, this pie in the sky. So what we find often is clients start there and they become paralyzed. They can't actually move forward because they don't really know how to get to that data. So one of the things that Matt and I often talk about with clients is it's okay to want that, and that's a wonderful goal, and you should set that. But at the end of the day, you need to walk before you run. We have to set achievable goals, or you're going to want to quit in a month. You're going to look at this and go, I can't achieve any of this, and I don't know how to get there. So the goal is to take a look at what can I do that is measurable, repeatable, and actually attainable at the beginning. And again, that may mean that you build on it and there's multiple phases to it and that your goal is to get to that pie in the sky, but that takes time. And, we don't want everyone quitting before they even get started. So when we talk about goals, we said here is, what can I measure right now? What part of my campaign is, if your marketing automation system isn't running 100% there, or maybe some of you don't even have them yet. That doesn't mean you can't measure. That doesn't mean you can't set goals. So take a look at what can I measure right now. The other question I ask myself is, how will I define success? Success might be that I got 5 shares on Twitter with the one-click socials I embedded in my piece of content. Defining success might be that a blog got picked up and syndicated somewhere. So start small, set goals that you think you can reach, and then talk about how can I repeat it. So, if you've got an email going out and you are A/B testing your subject line, for example, and you see that one type of subject line is continually winning out. So the next thing is, okay, I know that really uber creative subject lines get really high opens with my audience. So the next question you may ask yourself is, so how can I take that to the next level? And is there a level beyond that that's going to even drive more opens, or do I get to a level where it stops working? And so it's continually testing, measuring results, and then repeating them. And when you do this, you're going to start to see that if I take these small steps, all of a sudden you're building on results, and you look at a year and you go, wow, I had a really successful year. I sent out a piece of content every 2 weeks in a progression with my messaging to my personas, and I saw my opens increase across the year. I saw some social shares go up. And so then when you go into next year planning, you go, okay, so how do I make that even better? But, it's really important, because we see a lot of people kind of feel like they're failing and then want to give up if they don't set those realistic. So I'm going to use a case here quick to show you some successes and then how they took those successes to build. So Cox Media has been a client of ours for several years, and they do some really creative things with their content. They're great to work with. They tend to go to people who buy ads, so we know those people are a little more creative. So it definitely lends themselves to a to some creative types of content. But what they've done really well is they laid that foundation that Matt talked about. They did personas. They did an audit. They did, content strategy work. And it didn't all look exactly like Matt laid it out. They did it slightly different. They adjusted it to fit their needs. But they laid the foundation before they started creating content. And then they laid a plan for the content they were going to create. So at the beginning of 2014, their first campaign that they did with their foundational elements was a 2014 Success Kit. It included a variety of formats to appeal to their SMB customers. So it had some ebooks, it had some video, it had some infographics. When they laid this foundation, they saw some great results. They generated 2,300 leads with this first Success Kit. They had 750 downloads or views of the content that they did. It was a huge contributor to Q1 lead demand gen performance. So they ended up pacing 16% ahead of the previous year. And they know that this was a huge part of that. And they were able then to break that content up in smaller pieces all through the year, helping to continue to drive leads all the way through Q4. So they had a really good result with just creating content with the foundation and putting in a progression and having different types of content and leading it through with the messaging that derived. So what does that mean for 2015? Well, they took what they learned and they now did multiple campaigns. Again, still being very strategic about it and not being overly ambitious in a way that they couldn't actually succeed with all of the campaigns they needed to run. They repurposed even more. And they started developing some interactive tools because what they learned was that interactive tools and video were really popular with their audience. They saw what they downloaded as a result, and so then they pulled it into 2015. And so they continued the success, and they are creating some really cool content and are continuing to see the results. So that's all that we have for today. I know we're a little bit over. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Kim, to go ahead and see if there's any questions.
Great. Matt and Dana, your presentation sparked a lot of great questions. So let's get to some of them now. Michael wants to know, you mentioned data sources to drive your persona development process. Should they be internal, external data, or a mix of both? And also, what types of data are most relevant when you're developing personas? Matt, maybe that's a question you can take on.
Sure, Kim. So the external, internal data source question, I really think of the external data as being the data that you're going to create through the process of creating and conducting that survey. That's going to generate a lot of statistically valid data that you can go back and analyze, look at, run crosstabs on, and get a lot of great insights out of there. Your internal data, that's going to depend a little bit on the technology stack that you're running inside your organization. Most companies have a CRM system in place. Most of them also at this point have a marketing automation platform in place that's going to be either have some web analytics or it's going to tie into a web analytics system. So those are going to give you a lot of great data. And like I said, that's going to give you a good starting point, especially for building those sort of proto-personas. Looking at, who are your best customers in terms of, for example, look at your best deal, whether it's a deal size or the length of the buying process or whatever other criteria you want to use to define a really good deal. And begin looking at the qualities of those customers. What verticals are they coming from? What company size? What job roles are you typically speaking to when you're engaged in these conversations? And that'll give you the starting point to begin to build personas around those folks because they're going to be your logical targets for this exercise. And then your marketing automation platform or web analytics are going to give you some good insights into their behavior. What kinds of content do these folks like? If it's in terms of job role or whatever targets you've set up. Where do they go on your site? How much time do they spend? Where do they tend to come in or go out? Are there certain topics or content formats that they like? These are all great insights that you can bring into your persona process and use at various points. Was there a second part to that question, Kim? I forget.
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of people don't look at those insights into web traffic when developing personas, so that's an interesting thing to look at. All right, next question we have is from Victoria. She wants to know, when you do a content gap analysis, in addition to reviewing your own content, obviously, to what extent do you need to look at what competitors are developing? Matt, maybe you can take that one.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So it's important to look at your competitors' content. You want to know what they're doing. Obviously, that gives you some good context for your own activities, and you want to know what your competitors are up to and kind of where you stand in terms of how your campaigns and your content are stacking up against theirs. But I would caution you against bringing that into your own process that we've talked about here today. We're beginning this process by understanding your buyers and getting insights into your buyers. And that's what really needs to drive your process. And your content audit, it needs to involve your content library, the assets that you're going to be able to use in your campaigns. So to that extent, this is kind of an inward-looking process in terms of your objectives. Not your methods, but certainly you don't want to bring competitors too much into the process at this point, because you really need to focus on what you're doing to build those personas, to understand your content library, and then to apply those insights without complicating it by bringing in things like a competitor's library. Now, of course, once you've got those insights and once you understand what your content library looks like and you're beginning to build your own campaigns, that is a great time to go back again and look at what your competitors are doing. What does their content library look like? Is there any evidence that they have personas and that they're using personas to guide their messaging or their content development? So, it's important to keep an eye on that and to know when to use it, but I would caution you against using it at the wrong point in your process, so you might get sidetracked.
All right, so really start with an introspective look at what you're doing. Great. All right, Dana, maybe you can take the next question. It's from Heather. You stressed creating content for the entire funnel. We're having our biggest challenge in developing the right content for mid-funnel. Do you have any suggestions that work best there?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing some really good results with things like checklists and Q&A, especially mid to late stage funnel. And the reason being is that by that stage of the funnel, people are looking to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty, right? They need to know what it is that I need to do to make this decision. How do I solve this pain point? And checklists and Q&As, if they're structured correctly, are easy to navigate. And so, like, if I have a checklist on 10 steps or 10 questions to ask before migrating to cloud, let's say, I can basically skim those questions and go, okay, I've asked that, and I've addressed it, I've asked that, I've addressed it. Oh, wait, there's one I haven't asked. So I need to take a look at it. So it allows me to really scroll through and pick what applies to me in an easy way instead of trying to get through like an 8-page ebook. Same thing with the Q&A is take those questions that people are asking at that point of the process and just do the question and do the answer. Give it to them really straight. Just, what we caution with these assets is if they're too fluffy and they're not actionable, they're not going to be meaningful. By mid-stage, they have to be meaningful assets. So some of the success of these assets come from, making sure that they're actionable, attainable, and meaningful to the person reading them. So, always make sure that you're coming back to them. But those are some of the mid-stage stuff that we're seeing, I think really make a difference as they're pulling it through the buyer's journey.
All right, actionable. There you go. All right, we have one more question we can take from Evan. Dana, you covered some of the basic metrics that marketers should track. They'll walk before you run, but what about when you get ready to run? What are some of the more advanced metrics that you should be looking for to, kind of once you master the basics?
Right. So when you're ready and you get there, we really will start to recommend that people start to take a look at Serious Decisions Reverse Waterfall. So the Reverse Waterfall really is a tool that is designed to show you how many suspects I need to put into the top of the funnel to actually output a certain dollar revenue. And when you have some background data to do that, and you can set it up as kind of a laggard, a medium, or a very mature company, but we have to have some data to plug into it. When you have some data to plug into it, it's actually going to tell you how to work backwards in order to achieve the results you did. So it allows you to actually say that marketing is going to be responsible for driving 30% of leads or revenue for the year, and this is how we're going to do it. And so that's, really what we recommend starting to look at. But I think a lot of our people will come to us with that right away, and there's just, it's much more difficult to do, and it's kind of scary when you look at it. So, but when you're ready to, we recommend that you tackle it. It's a huge, useful tool to use and really can help you drive home. It basically gives you a plan for the year in terms of, I know I'm going to have to buy this many names, I know I'm going to have to do this many shows, I know I'm going to have to do, all of this by tactic, and it really spits out for you how many leads you're going to drive. And so it's a good way to plan your year, and it's really accurate when you get to the bottom of it.
Well, great. Well, thank you to Dana and Matt for sharing your great insights. Thank you all to the attendees for taking the time to join us today. Just a reminder that today's webinar will be available on demand so that you can access it at any time. Share it with your colleagues. That wraps up the presentation as well as our strategy and planning series. Please check out all of the sessions will be available on demand, and please also check out our Content to Conversion conference. Definitely a place to gather good content strategies for the coming year as well. That will be in February. So thanks to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.